Like I said, I am a W210 owner, and this is, I think, definitely a car worth talking about that maybe is a little underappreciated. I'm going to talk about some of the same areas on this car as we did with the 124. I found this picture with Mercedes, and I find it a little questionable that they would be towing a boat of that weight with an E-Class wagon, but anyway, it makes for a good picture. So these cars, the development began on them basically a few years after the 124 was introduced in the late 80s. And the design work was carried out in the early 90s. Mercedes filed patents for their design right around 1993 and for the W208 CLK. And one thing that I think is important to note here is that at this point, Mercedes did not have the E-Class coupe or convertible. They had the CLK coupe and convertible, which were actually not part of the 210 chassis. They were part of the W208. And the design language carried over into those cars. They were basically the same size as the E-Class coupe and filled that role. And it would continue to be called the CLK until I think maybe 2010 or so. And they brought the E-Class coupe and convertible back out again. So these cars were designed by a British designer named Steve Motton, who was the senior stylist at Mercedes-Benz. And of course, Bruno Sacco was still head of design at the time. And these cars were styling developed and complete in the early 90s. Styling would carry over to the CLK. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting is Steve Motton would eventually go on to design cars for Volvo and some other car companies. And he seems to really pay a lot of attention to headlights in his car design. I was watching a video of him talking about a Volvo that he designed. And I think that that's interesting because one of the things that people talk about quite a bit with the 210 is its big, round headlights. And people seem to either like that or really not like it, depending on who you talk to. But the car actually did win some design awards in Europe at the time. So the overall shape and design was premiered with the coupe at the Geneva Auto Show. The sedan was introduced in 1995, and we would see it in the US in 1996. This is kind of an interesting page of safety developments that Mercedes had, and this is from a 2000 model year brochure. So at this point, Mercedes was putting side curtain airbags in the E-Class. They had side impact airbags in all four doors. In my 1999 E320, it has side impact airbags, but they're only on the front, driver's side, and passenger side doors. They had done a lot of re-engineering and structural reinforcement on the body to make it a really tough, strong car in the event of an accident. And of course, we also started seeing that SOS button that we see in pretty much every Mercedes today, which is kind of interesting too. And like I had mentioned, on the 124 series, the 4MATIC was not very popular, and Mercedes did bring 4MATIC back around for 1998 in these cars, and they wanted to market it as a way to have a more sure-footed car in a lot of different types of weather, whether it be a heavy rainstorm or snow or things like that. And I would say that it's still somewhat rare that you would find a 210 with 4MATIC. A lot of them were rear-wheel drives. It was something that was not as important to people at the time. And it's kind of interesting because where I live here in Western North Carolina, you pretty much cannot sell a Mercedes unless it is a 4MATIC, particularly with the new ones. It's something that seems to be really important to people. And that kind of goes for all cars, whether you're talking about a C-Class or a GLE or something like that. I can tell you that I actually drove my car one time through a really bad snowstorm, and the car did fishtail and slide some, but it did make it. Luckily, at the time, I had just put a brand new set of Pirelli P6 all-season tires on it, which helped. It wasn't a snow tire. It was an all-season tire. And I thought the car would not make it. I was being followed by my brother, who was driving a big lifted Nissan Xterra. And at one point, we passed the snowplow truck. We were driving through kind of a hilly area that is on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. And so at that point, it was my little Mercedes leading this big lifted truck, and then the snowplow was right behind my brother. So we made it. I don't care to do that again, but the car did do it. So in 2000, Mercedes freshened up the styling of the car a little bit. They added the multi-function interior controls on the steering wheel, and then did add the shiftable component to the 5-speed automatic. Command navigation, we started seeing that about 2000, and it's really rare that you see command navigation or the backup sensors on these cars, but that was available. So there are fewer models and body styles within the 210 series compared to the 124, but we'll cover some of those real quick. So what I call the first generation cars were made between 96 and 99. In the first 2 years of production, they carried the inline 6-cylinder over from the W124 E-Class. So they had the inline 6 in 96 and 97. Then they produced the 3.2 liter V6. Started offering all-wheel drive in 98, 99. Had the big bad 4.2 liter and 4.3 liter V8s. And then there were a couple diesel models too. It was a 3 liter inline 6 diesel. I think it had 178 horsepower, something like that. Second generation had some mild restyling. They kept that V6. At this point, you could get all-wheel drive with the V8, which that's a pretty cool car. 4.3 liter V8. The wagon had a similar range of offerings as far as engine. Again, Mercedes did not offer diesel or big V8 on E-Class wagons in the US. The car in the picture is a European model, so it's like an E270 diesel or something like that. And one thing I think is important to know is that when Mercedes came out with the next generation of E-Class in 2003, they carried the wagon over one more year. So they were still making this body style in the wagon in 2003 before they came out with the S211, which was the next generation of E-Class wagon. Some specs on the engines for you. Mercedes had the 3.2 liter V6, which had about 221 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a whole lot to us today when we have all these little turbocharged 4-cylinders running around that have 240, 250 horsepower. But I can tell you that this is a really good engine. I spent a lot of time driving on the highway between here and Indiana when I was going to college. And when I take this car on some of our longer events here for the sections in our club, it's a really nice car to get out on the highway with. You can set the cruise control at about 70 miles an hour, and it just seems like nothing in this car. The V8, again, it's a little surprising, I think, to us that it'd be rated at 275 horsepower, but still a really good engine, really smooth, quiet, reliable engine. Both of these cars said 0 to 60 times under 10 seconds, which I think is quite respectable for the time period. And then, of course, the big bad E55 AMG. And this car had the 5.4 liter V8, which was rated at 350 horsepower, at least in 2000. Had these big old 13.1 inch ventilated brake discs, an AMG tuned Bilstein suspension. And I think the real beauty of this car is its subtlety. If you were not a car enthusiast, you might just think that this was another E-Class sedan, because the only things that really give it away are those big monoblock AMG wheels and then some kind of subtle restyling on the front, rear bumper, and side skirts of the car. And this car was a real serious contender in its time period. It really was against a lot of the competition. And at this point, Mercedes had officially linked up with AMG. AMG was a part of Mercedes. So I think a really underappreciated car for what it is. So we saw the car in 99. It would be produced for 3 more years after that. It was one of the last cars that actually had a portion of its assembly at a Falterbach. And if you go to AMG's facility in Germany today, you know, if you take like the MBCA tour to Germany or something like that, you'll see them manufacturing the AMG engines there, doing some customization to AMG cars for really high-end clients, but they don't really build entire cars there. And they ship out the engines to Zindelfingen or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Bremen, where the bulk of the assembly occurs on the AMG model. So today you would see an AMG E-Class going down the same assembly line as an E300 4MATIC, or they're calling them E350s again at this point. Nice interior shot of one here. This is a car that had the cranberry and charcoal Napa leather in it, two-tone. It was a fully perforated seat. Had this really nice dark burlwood in them. And I think this is so much more tasteful than a lot of the new performance cars that have like this brushed aluminum or this like kind of silver plastic looking stuff in them now. And Mercedes didn't lose any class by going to a performance car with them as far as the look and everything. It wasn't quite as aggressive. Still had a 5-speed automatic with the touch shifter in it. Like we were talking about at the beginning, you'll see a fair amount of these cars with like a black and white two-tone Designo interior that was available at the time. And then right around this time, we were also beginning to see the Designo design options come into the picture a bit more too. And you could get Designo on the standard E-Class as well as the AMG. And so in this picture here, you have what's called the Designo Silver Edition, which was this kind of silvery gold color. It had this crazy dark green and charcoal Napa interior that had a it had a natural maple wood in it. It has this beautiful wood rim steering wheel. And then the black car you can kind of see off in the back is the Designo Espresso Edition, which was like a metallic black color with this kind of cognac looking interior in it. And it had a natural maple wood as well. No, excuse me, it was an elm wood in this car and a beautiful wood rim steering wheel as well. And I don't know about you guys, but I have never seen, I've seen a Designo E55. I have never seen one of these Designo cars for sale on the market. And I look at these cars all the time, look at a lot of cars all the time. So I don't know if anybody has one or has seen one, certainly the silver edition with this green interior. But I remember looking at an E55 a while back that was a Designo car, and it was like a metallic dark brown color with a saddle interior. And this car was at a Mercedes collector car dealer in Palm Beach, Florida. And the guy told me it had been owned by the CEO of Smith & Wesson, and it was his wife's car. And at the time I really wanted this car. It was not a good time for me to be buying it. So I had to pass, but it's pretty unusual, pretty unique car. So a few things to think about if you're going to look at owning or purchasing one. These cars have a really low cost of entry. Even a lot of the really nice examples are very affordable. One thing I thought that's great about them is they can get close to 30 miles per gallon on the highway, and they have a 21-gallon fuel tank in them. So they have a really great cruising range. It's easy to get parts for them through dealers and a lot of aftermarket type places. And they're really comfortable and quiet. And I would say the only caveat to that is you need to put a really premium tire on them, either Pirelli or Michelin, maybe some of the nicer Bridgestone tires. And that goes for the 124 as well. You also need to make sure that you have a tire that's rated for these cars. They talk about speed ratings on performance tires. And you need to have a tire that is rated to handle the weight of these cars at speed. So I typically have used Pirelli and Michelin on mine. I typically have been buying Pirellis because they're a little bit cheaper. Don't last quite as long, but they're still a really good tire. So a few things to think about. This can be kind of a good or bad thing, which is the non-AMG cars are never going to be that valuable, which is good because you can buy one for not a ton of money. The bad thing is that a lot of people have acquired them inexpensively. They're not necessarily car enthusiasts. And so sometimes it's hard to find a nice one among kind of a sea of cars that maybe have been neglected or just not kept up quite the way we would expect. And I would say it is not worth your time either with a 124 or a 210 to buy a rough car that needs a lot of work. Unless you're a mechanic or serious hobbyist or something like that, it is not going to be worth the work to buy a really rough like E320 or something like that and spend a lot of time and money on that car. So these cars have a few quirks to them, and I think the one thing that's worth talking about on this list is the crankshaft positioning sensor. It's not really something that you can check very easily to see if it's going to fail, but if this part fails, the car will basically shut down without warning. And this part can be an issue on some of the MLs, like some of the M class from this time period. But mine actually failed at about 97,000 miles, and they typically can go bad between the 80 to 100,000 mile range. And this is a sensor in the engine, and what happens is as it goes bad, it heats up, and once it overheats, it shuts the car down. And the first time mine failed, I was actually pulling into the driveway at my house, and the car just shut off. And I thought, well, that seems kind of weird. So the next day I went out, car started right up. I drove it to the gas station, same thing, it would not start after I filled it up. So I came back to the gas station a couple hours later and got it, nearly made it back to my house again, and the car died again. And we thought the fuel pump was going bad, but I had it towed to the local Mercedes dealer and they diagnosed it. I think it was like $300 or something to repair it for parts and labor. And it's not a big deal. The oil leaks on the engine are something that you just kind of want to keep up with. Otherwise, you may have bigger problems down the line. Valve cover gaskets are a common thing. The front crank seal was actually an issue when the cars were new. And they had Mercedes issued a recall on it, and they basically resealed this area with this kind of JB Weld epoxy type stuff, which does have to be resealed as the cars get old. It's not that big of a deal, but they'll seep a little bit of oil from that place. So a few things there. Rust can be an issue on these cars. It was a far bigger issue in Europe compared to the United States. But again, if the cars are in a real harsh area, like in the Midwest or Northeast of the United States, they can get a lot of rust. And I can tell you after hand washing this car, most every week for 13 years, these cars have a lot of nooks and crannies and crevices in them where water and dirt can accumulate. So you might see rust. You typically will see it in the doors on these cars, right where that trim piece is, but you could also see it around the fender wells or the headlights, things like that. The spring purchase, that's just something to have your technician keep an eye on as you have the car serviced, or if you work on it yourself, just take a look at them, because if they rust out, the car will collapse. It won't cause you to lose control of it, but it definitely would be pretty startling if that happened. So a real general guide to pricing, like I said, not a high cost of entry on these cars. I saw a really nice, I think it was a 98 or 99 E320 on our local Craigslist that had 55,000 miles, one owner car, white with a tan interior, and they were asking like $5,500 for this car, and it was on there for like 3 days or something. Some of the wagons still are, I think, becoming more desirable over time. E55, kind of a rough guideline on price for these cars. I think you can find a really nice E55 for $15,000, $16,000 based on a lot of the ones I've seen out there. So again, I think if you are looking for a really cool performance sedan from this time period and you think something like a 500E is a little bit out of your range, E55, certainly a car I would consider for sure. And like I said, I have an SL 500 and the E320. And I kind of feel like if you put both of those cars together, you get the E55, just with a bigger engine, of course. So that's most of the material that I wanted to present today. And I'm going to open things up now. If we have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have these cars, any questions or anything else, particularly about the 210, I'll be glad to take those at this time. So.
I have a question regarding the E55 production. Do you know where I can find how many E55s were made?
Well, that's a good question, and something that I try to look into, and it's kind of tough because since the 210 cars aren't as old as the 124, there aren't really a lot of books and things about them at this point. So that's something I'm going to have to look into a little bit, and we might do a post on our Facebook page about something like that. I think that from what I saw, like some of the Wikipedia entries and stuff like that, I'm not sure exactly how accurate some of those are. There are some production numbers on the cars there, but that's a good question. I don't 100% know the answer to, so we may have to do a little digging around and see if we can find a good way to get those numbers. And those are some more sources I have. Let's see, got another question?
Frank, I asked what the W stands for.
Oh, well, W basically means that the car is a sedan most of the time, whereas S denotes that it's a wagon. And I'm not, somebody else may be able to provide a little bit more detail about that. But it's kind of like when we talk about the SLs, R is denoting it's a roadster like R129 or R107. But the W indicates that the car is a sedan for Mercedes codes.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the number, I'm not sure how they determine that part, but it's just probably through their development series they come up with the 210 or 124 or something.
So the W124 is this book that you spoke about, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The book you spoke about is the W124.
Yes. Yep. There's a really good book that I got off Amazon that is written by a guy named James Taylor. It's called Mercedes-Benz W124, The Complete Story. And it has a lot of really cool pictures and really detailed information about production numbers in it. It wasn't really expensive, but it's a hardcover book, and it has a lot more pictures of the development of the cars, as well as like pictures of some of the cutaway cars that have been made into hearses and stuff like that in it too. So I would highly recommend it.
When I looked it up, he's written a new book for the W210.
Okay.
That comes out in November.
Ah, well then that may give us some of our answers on production numbers for the E55s then. So I guess we'll all need to check that out.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, when I looked, it's on Amazon. You can pre-order it.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I always like to try to get books about the cars that I have. And when I went to Germany with the MBCA back in 2015, I was in the bookstore, the Mercedes Museum there, and I got a really cool book about the R129 SL from the 90s. The only problem is the whole book is in German, so I can't read it, but it has a lot of really cool pictures in it. And so I got that, and I've been trying to build up more of a library about these cars. And I think if you have one, it's worth doing just to learn more about the history of them. And because these cars are just becoming on the older side, we're now beginning to find out more of the things that you have to look out for with them, basically just from information from people that have owned them. So we're probably bound to find out more about things to look out for with the W210, but um, every time I would take mine into my technician for service, I just kind of ask him like, hey, we've done this, this, and this. What else do I need to be looking out
Have
for
any questions you want to ask him?
going forward?
No.
And
No.
he's always a good source of information
He's
for
not
me.
bad.
That was good.
And I am always kind of looking around for the next for other plans. So every time I would see him to have my car serviced, I would say, well, what do you think about a W140S class? Or what do you think about a W123 300D? And he'd always give me this
when you went there.
on those cars because he'd worked on
No.
cars in an independent shop for years. And so I think it's really important to find somebody that has looked at these cars for years and years, that knows them like the back of their hand, particularly if you're not mechanically inclined. I'm more of a detailer and car cleaner guy, so I like to get a pretty nice car and clean it up and just drive it and enjoy it and let somebody else handle the mechanical parts of it. And I don't like to buy rough cars and try to go through all this stuff with them. That's just not my thing. So any other questions or comments out there? I know we've actually surprisingly got a pretty nice day up here in Western North Carolina where I am after having rain all week. And I don't know how it is for some of my friends in South Carolina in our section, but if we don't have any other questions or comments, we may kind of wrap things up just a little bit early so we can all enjoy the day. I'll check out our chat here and just make sure. And we actually are recording this, so we'll post this eventually on our Facebook page and YouTube and stuff too. But let's look at the chat. So yes, how do you find a good mechanic or to form a good relationship with one? Well, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, there's not a great way to answer that because I kind of accidentally met my mechanic that worked on my car for many years. I was working at a Ford dealership at the time, and I would have them do kind of simple things on the car because I couldn't always leave there very easily from work. And finally, one of the guys in the parts department's like, Frank, I'm really good friends with this guy who's Mercedes-Benz technician. You need to take your car to him. And so I took my car to him for probably 8 years. And now I'm in kind of a different situation. So I've been taking my cars to the dealership here in Asheville, and they have a couple guys that have worked on Mercedes for a long time there, so they can handle some of these older cars well, and I haven't had any issues. But yeah, Joe raises a good point is I would get with other Mercedes owners. I would search around and see what kind of independent shops are in your area for Mercedes. I think for a car like a 400E, I would definitely take that to an independent shop because that's not a car a lot of dealers are going to see. So it's just something, you want somebody that has seen a lot of those cars to lay their eyes on it rather than someone who doesn't work on a lot of older cars. That's my opinion. But it takes time, and you may try out one shop and have them do some simple stuff. And if you feel like it's a hassle or they're not giving you the straight scoop, then I would go somewhere else. I remember trying a place here in Asheville that did Mercedes, Porsche, and Audi, and I had them look over my car after I bought it, and they gave me this long laundry list of stuff that was like $2,500 of things they thought I needed to do the car, and I was like, you know what, I'll find somebody else, and I did. But pre-purchase inspections, that's a good point, Joe. If you have a good relationship with an independent shop, that would be my first choice for doing a pre-purchase inspection. If you already take your car to them and spend money there, if they're a good shop, most of the time they won't even charge you anything for it. And the guy that I work for, I looked at a couple of cars that were not so great, and luckily he told me they were not so great, so I passed on them, but he looked over them because I basically was taking 2 or 3 cars to him. So I was spending a fair amount of money there. And so he didn't mind looking at a car and not charging me for it. But dealers, can be a good source. I would say on these older cars, I would consult with an independent person, or if you have a friend or member in the Mercedes club that's a very knowledgeable person, I would say to, and Joe will know when I'm talking about this, but if you have somebody like Gary Edwards in the Peachtree section who's a friend or fellow member of yours in the Mercedes club, you could bring somebody like that to help you look at a car, or just find a good independent shop would be my recommendations.